The End. It's one of the most mysterious areas in all of Minecraft, and as such, for many years, we have been left with many unanswered questions. So now, it's finally time to uncover the secret story behind the End. Millions of years ago, there were three main dimensions in the Minecraft universe, those being the Overworld, the Nether, and the Prosperous Realms. Now, the Nether and the Overworld. At those times, they were going through a massive war, as different species competed for control over the lands. Now, on the other hand, there were the Realms, which was a dimension that existed separated from the Nether and the Overworld, in that there were no ways for anyone or anything to get there. Or so they thought. You see, that war that was going on for centuries in the Overworld, well, something changed. The Warpers, who are one of the species fighting, were starting to lose, and as such, they began hiding in strongholds in an attempt to stay hidden and alive. But while they were hiding inside these strongholds, they started to use their magical abilities to try and create a portal to take them somewhere safe. But while they were doing that, they had somehow been able to gain access to a common stone block from the Realms, and with that block, they were able to make a portal to the Realms. But the Warpers weren't planning on using that portal just yet, because it required the sacrifice of a few of them to keep it open, and as such, it was decided that it would only be used as a last resort. But one day, it would become their last resort, as their enemy had found them, and so that's how the Warpers ended up in the Realms. But arriving at the Realms didn't come without a very heavy cost, as all the Warpers' powers were forcefully ripped away from them and were absorbed into the land below. This left the Warpers without the ability to teleport, much weaker and very frail. Now, those powers that were being absorbed into the land, well, they weren't exactly meant to be there. After all, these were powers from another dimension they had never interacted with, and as such, there were some adverse effects. But not to worry, as that power absorption wouldn't cause too much of a problem if the Realms only encountered a few Warpers. Except, there weren't just a few Warpers appearing. There were millions, if not billions of Warpers arriving, losing their powers as they were absorbed into the land. But very quickly, this got to a breaking point, and all that built up power was suddenly released in the biggest explosion in the entire Minecraft universe. So all the lands in the Realms started to melt away, with only one common space stone remaining. Even the bedrock that protected the Realms from the void was destroyed by this event. And so, it was the end of the Prosperous Realms, as this once lively dimension was now barren and bare, with almost no signs of life. But there were some survivors. First, there were the Warpers. Now, they had been able to survive this massive destruction of this new world that they had just entered, as the destruction was caused from, well, themselves. So obviously, they wouldn't be too affected. Then there were the Mites. Now, these were small parasites who have been able to live by hiding inside the eyes of certain Warpers. And through that, they have been mutated a little bit that allowed them to gain some of the Warpers' resistance. But even though they were alive, they were very hated by the Warpers who felt like they were just being used. And finally, there were the shulkrites. Now, they were the only advanced civilization originally from the Realms that survived this event, and that was mainly due to sheer dumb luck. You see, this civilization lived on the outskirts of the world, which meant that when the event happened, they had time to run, gather important items, and stay hidden. So, while there may have been a lot of destruction in the Realms, there was still hope, and now it could be the ample opportunity to rebuild what was lost and create something great. But there was a slight problem. The dragons. Now, the dragons were the strongest creatures in all of the Realms, but for many years prior to its destruction, they had all been forced into hiding, as they would be constantly hunted down by many of the original civilizations who lived in the Realms. But now, with that explosion happening, and with many of the dragon hunters being killed, these dragons were finally free to roam the world. But now that they had their freedom, they wanted to keep it, and so they began to attack the shulkrites and the Warpers, just in case they were planning on attacking. And even though these were both very strong creatures, alone neither of them could defeat a single dragon, and as such, many of the shulkrites and the Warpers were killed by the dragon. And so, after many months of the dragon's uncontested reign, both the shulkrites and the Warpers were on the edge of extinction. And so, as a final attempt to stay alive, they united into one group. And so the first thing that this newly united group did was that they constructed large fortresses all across the outer rim of the End that would protect them from the dragon's attacks. Also, within these fortresses, the warpers and the shulkrites would farm a lot of beetroot, as that was the only crop that they would be able to grow now that the entire dimension was destroyed and the atmosphere was different. And these fortresses would also be a great place for the shulkrites to store any valuables that they had been able to gather and keep them safe. Finally, together they decorated these fortresses with banners representing their unification. And so, if you haven't guessed already, these fortresses, well, they were the End cities. So, now that they had created a good base to work from, they began to fight back against the dragons. The plan here was that they would construct large floating boats, as the dragon could fly and being in the air would allow for easier access to hit the beast. Then they would target each individual dragon one at a time, as that way it would be more likely that they could kill them. And so they started to execute on their plan. And after only a few years, much to their delight, most of these dragons were killed, as their plans had succeeded. Now, with all these dead dragons, they did a few things. First, they took their heads and they placed them at the front of their ships to scare off any other dragons. Then they also used any poisonous breath left behind from these beasts to make potions. And then finally, and most importantly, for each dragon, they were able to create something of very high use. This item had to be very meticulously created, and there could only be one for every dragon slain. And this item was none other than the subscriptor, the elytra. And these were by far the most prized possessions of these people, and as such they were kept safe and secure inside the floating ships. Now back to the dragon hunt. At this point, all but one of the dragons had been killed, and that dragon was called Jean, and she lived in the center islands of the End. Now, they couldn't just go there and kill her, because she was, well, different. She was the Ender Dragon. Now, what that meant was that she was able to absorb massive amount of energies from the Warper's power outbreak, which meant that she was much more defended and much stronger, and she was a dark magic wielder. Overall, a very powerful creature. And so, they were going to need a different strategy for getting rid of her. But just as they were thinking of a way to do that, something caught their attention. There was a plant growing in the lifeless land of the End. Now, obviously, they were all skeptical at first, but eventually they decided to investigate. Now, the Warpers, well, they were reluctant to try anything grown here other than their trusted beetroots. But the shulkrites, well, they gave it a go, and it changed everything. You see, that plant was the chorus fruit, and it allowed them to teleport, which was actually one of the Warpers' old abilities that had been lost to the realms. But now it had somehow been infused into this plant. And so, when they saw this, they were forced to put their plans for attacking Jean on a staggering halt, as the few Warpers that had seen this plant and tried it knew that they had to show everyone. And so, for the next few months, the shulkrites and the Warpers spent their time spreading the chorus fruits all over the End Islands, until everyone had access to it. But by the time that happened, something strange occurred. They started to evolve, and quickly, because they were both only eating the chorus plants, and so the Warpers were changed, as they had been able to fully regain their ability to teleport. And when that happened, they became taller, thinner, and stronger, and their eyes turned back to purple with all their power that they had regained. And so the Warpers transformed into what we recognize today as the Endermen. Now, as for the shulkrites, they weren't affected in as much of a positive way. You see, the shulkrites, now with the ability to teleport, no longer needed to walk anywhere, which meant they no longer had the need for their legs, and they also didn't need any arms anymore, thanks to the new attack that was given due to these new powers. And so, it began to shrink to conserve energy. Now, in that shrunken form, they were very weak, so the Endermen tried to give them a protective coating to stay safe. And once they'd done that, the shulkers had been created. But now the shulkers were stuck in place, and as such they were unable to move these floating ships to the center island. But what that really meant was that if the Endermen really wanted to get rid of all the other dragons, they were going to have to fight Jean alone. And so they used their teleportation ability to get to the center island, and they began their attack. Except that was a complete failure, as Jean was a dark magic wielder, and so she was able to hypnotize some of these Endermen, and she forced them to build massive towers to protect her and heal her. And then once they'd done that, she created small portals for the Endermen to be sent away back to the End Islands. But once the Endermen were sent back, they had also forgotten what had just happened. So they woke up to seeing these strange portals, and their curiosity got the better of them, and they ventured back inside, and it took them back to Jean, the Ender Dragon. But when they returned, she didn't attack them, because in reality, she wasn't a bad dragon who wanted to kill anyone. Really, she just wanted her last egg to hatch in peace and not be hunted down. And so when the Endermen saw that, they realized they were just a massive problem to this world, and so they wanted to fix the problems that they had created. And as such, they agreed to help her find a better, brighter place for the baby dragon to be born. And so the Ender Dragon sent them back to the Nether and the Overworlds in an attempt to do so. But obviously, Jean didn't 100% trust the Endermen, and so she also secretly sent some ghost-like dragon observers to watch over the Endermen, just to be safe they were being truthful. And those observers were the Phantoms. But the Phantoms weren't the only creation watching over a valuable item. After all, there are the Guardians, who were... But you'll need to watch this video to find out those secrets.